Battle of the Sexes. I know that's a title that seems to be, goes back a long way. Maybe it's even outdated, but the topic is still quite relevant. And though we've had many issues to address and deal with, especially lately, but women and men remains the two central figures in human history who both need each other, but also can challenge each other, shall we say. So I have a chapter in my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, called Women and Men, in the social section, on the society section. And being that we're corresponding these broadcasts with the book, Toward a Meaningful Life, those of you familiar with the book will definitely enhance the experience. But, as I always point out, it's a self-contained program. So let's enter the fray. Enter the fray. I mean, the cynics, and sometimes not cynics, some people call themselves realistic, like to say at times that men say this about women, women say it about men. Can't live with him, can't live without him. Can't live with her, can't live without her. There's definitely a need for each other. And at the same time, no one's really mastered the art of complete total harmony. And that may not be a bad thing, actually. Unfortunately, however, it could also turn into quite bitter feuds and battles and wars that have been fought. People claim to be in love and then just a few years later are fighting in a divorce court in the most ugly fashion. And we see from the divorce rate in today's society, not low, tells you that marriage is a challenge, and how many people remain technically married but are emotionally divorced. So I don't think I have to need to paint the picture of the challenges when it comes to women and men. So that's in the context of marriage. And then what about, in general, women and men in the workplace? We see last few years the Me Too movement and other forms of sexual harassment or other forms of taking advantage of someone's position. Men and women have been at odds in many different ways. And hence, back when, I'm not sure who coined it, but probably back in the 60s, the battle of the sexes. There was the humorous version of it. If you remember, it was the tennis match between Billie Jean King and, Riggs. I forgot what his first name was. And it was documented. It became an interesting match that reflected sometimes that men and women battle. But the truth is, when it comes to tennis or other sports, there's pretty much men's and women's versions because they're not really competitive simply due to the physical status of each one of them. And therefore there's women's tennis and men's tennis. I don't think anybody's been calling to change that because that reflects, as I said, the physique and the muscles and the simple strength and the ability to compete against one another. When it comes to other things, more the mind, yeah, there you might not have that quite a difference. But getting back to the topic, obviously it's a comprehensive issue and not one that can be covered in just a few minutes, even in 15, 20 minutes. But I'd like to share a few key points which I believe can really be helpful. And that is the actual perspective, the mystical perspective on men and women. Because I believe if we go back to the root, like in any given issue, the root, not the symptoms, we can clarify our roles and hence actually discover dimensions that though we may be different, the feminine, the masculine, yet can be completely complementary. Because a lot of what you find, whether it's in the business world, or in education, or in other forms of discussions where women's rights, whether it was there was 100 years ago, women's suffrage, there was the right to be able to vote, and later the battle for simply having equal treatment in the marketplace in the sense of salaries. It's still a battle. As much as the progress as women have made in the workplace and in academia and in other politics, there's still a certain level of either subtle or not so subtle looking down, if you wish, and seeing a woman not quite as valuable as a man. Many women will say it's still a man's world. We need to compete on man's terms, which frankly is not necessarily even the healthiest approach. But a lot of it is based on, I'll call it symptoms. Symptoms means, yes, when you see men are being treated a certain way, and women say, one second, why are we being treated less? Obviously, they deserve to be treated equally. There's no such thing as male superiority. And I'm a firm believer of that, especially based on the tradition where I come from. But the fact of the matter is, there is an element of a sexual tension between men and women, and men will try to use their power in their own way. Women may also use their power in their own way. But these are all dealing with the symptoms. Do we really know what a man truly is, what a woman truly is? I would submit that there's an identity crisis. People call identity politics, but let's call it an identity crisis. Both not just a sexual identity crisis, but in general, a gender identity crisis. And what I mean by crisis, I don't mean a crisis where it's an emergency where there's immediate danger, but there's an overall danger, because when you don't identify who you are, obviously, for example, if you have two people competing over one, they both want to be the chief financial officer in their company. One person is totally competent and capable, the other one's not. But the other one wants the position, wants the salary, wants the recognition. If you don't know what you're good at, you're obviously going to be looking to find what others are doing, and maybe you feel that you deserve that. You may or it may not. So much of the conflicts that happen in general, not just between genders, but in general, are a result of not being comfortable and knowing who you really are. So I'll put it in this way, in this context. There was a time in history, back when labor was very different than it is today. It wasn't as glamorous. It was struggling and sweating an entire day on a farm during the agricultural era, agricultural times. Before that, in different forms, labor was considered actually an inferior activity. You go back to the times of the Greeks and then the Romans. Labor was for the layperson, not for the leaders. Labor was considered, work was considered an inferior thing. It's like a means to an end. Why? Because labor consisted of hard labor. In many ways, why did men dominate that labor market? Because they were physically stronger. So husband and wife get married, they build a family. The way to make money is by chopping wood, or carrying water, or working on a farm. So who's going to make more money? The person who can carry more wood. It was based on, yes, brute strength. But a job was not a glamorous position at the time. You could say actually what was much more glamorous and much more distinguished and much more elegant was bringing up the children at home, educating and shaping them. But that was a very different world. With the onset of the Industrial Revolution, things changed. And there's a lot that has been written about this. I've written myself much about the birth of a career. Even earlier than the Industrial Revolution, in Calvinist thinking, the Protestant work ethic. But work was still difficult then. You had to spend all day working on a field just to get a bushel of potatoes, be able to eat, and then sell maybe the rest or trade it off. But with the onset of modern technology, and work became much easier, and far more brainy, and not necessarily based on pure brute strength, then what happened was, since the men were essentially the workers, though women worked, but it was not quite to the same extent, so that career became their life. And what happened? Suddenly a world was built that was outside of their home. It was the career. Why do they have to go back to crying children and a nervous wife? Just the stereotype that was described. They could be with their buddies and go for a drink. What happened was the women were left, so to speak, to take care of the home, and the men went off to party. So after a while, it's quite obvious that the woman would rise and say, one second, this is not a fair agreement here. Once upon a time, the reason you went to work was one reason. You brought more money home so we can use the money to build our homes and our lives and to educate our children and live up to our values, whatever it may be. But once you created your own little world out there, women wanted the same. So what really happened was a transfer of the center of the universe. If you live a life, a meaningful life, and I use that word deliberately, intentionally, and the whole purpose of your life is to spiritualize your environment, that's the purpose and mission of your life, obviously then your roles, whether it's male or female, are going to fit into that higher purpose. But if there's no such purpose, if the purpose is to make as much money as you can, to entertain yourself, to enjoy yourself, then there's a very different dynamic at work. That's one important point, which we'll get back to shortly. The second important point is what exactly defines masculine energy and what defines feminine energy. Not how society has shaped it, not how it's evolved in our modern world, but what really makes a woman be at her best and a male being at their best. An important disclaimer should be added. There's no such thing as pure masculine, pure feminine. Every feminine energy has some masculine energy in it, and every masculine has some feminine. So what it really makes us tick? So physiologically, or even sexually and biologically, people talk about male and female. They each serve a different role in the act of mating and breeding and so on, as it is in the animal world. But that's the physical side of it. What about the psychological, the spiritual dynamic at work? Are they really that different, or are they more similar than they're different? We know there are differences. There's no question there are differences. But what is the root of it? And again, I'm focusing not on the cultural, not what your mother told you or your father told you or society tells you or the media tells you, but how you were born. What is your makeup? And I go back to the analogy, another analogy. If you're a creative person by nature, that's who you are. And your happiness will be achieved by actualizing your creativity. If you're let's call it a cerebral person, you're a person that loves data, processing information, then that's the thing that will be your most likely success and happiness coming from there. So it's important to know who you are before you begin doing things. To just say others are doing it, I also want to do it, most important thing is to recognize who you are. And here I bring it back to the teachings of the mystics. Fascinating teaching. It's based on the Bible. Then we talk about male and female. They were actually created as one and then split into two. Created as one and split into two. And then therefore they go back, they search each other, which is the reason for, this is the cause for sexual and physical attraction among the genders, because they want to reconnect to the unified picture, to that unified whole that they were once. That doesn't mean they can't build a life on their own. It just means there's some transcendent element that's achieved, a synergy, that's more than the sum of the parts. And what are these two energies? The mystics explain, before male and female were born on this earth, they represented two spiritual types of energy. And these two forms of energy, every human being has within them, male or female. It's only a question of which is primary. One is an intimate energy. It's the way you interact with yourself. Another is an extrovert energy, the energy that you interact with others. Both are necessary. Every human being needs to have that inner intimate self, and everyone has to interact, and they complement each other. But if someone were to say to you, which is the more powerful energy? It all depends on which one you're speaking about. Is aggressive, warrior-like tendencies, which are usually associated with more masculine personality, superior to the intimate inward and gentle, loving tendencies that is often ascribed to the feminine? And again, I'm not talking about a particular man or woman, because as I said, all of us need both. But when you think of it that way, you say to yourself, 1 second, if I'm focused on my spiritual mission in life, then basically I really need both. There are people who are great at partying, they're great at conquest, but they don't know how to be with themselves. They don't know how to be with others. Some of us have developed shark tendencies. We're great at winning, but we're not great at just being. Often you can describe a certain masculine energy being more like a verb. Love is a verb, is an act. And for a woman, it can be much more of a noun, a state of being. Both are necessary in this world. But what's happened, unfortunately, in a materialistic world that loses its focus and its sense of purpose, you know what happens? What happens then you give much more value to short-term gains. Some say, and I would tend to agree, that if women ran the world in their natural state, we would have no war. War is a masculine type of feature. That doesn't mean women can't go to war, and doesn't mean a woman can't be a warrior. But generally speaking, that tendency that you have the ability to know how to love, how to nurture, is a tremendous skill that is not valued in this world. We don't value that feminine, intimate energy. We value aggression. Go out and get it. And fight for it. And they won't respect you unless no one will take care of you unless you take care of yourself. So though there are times we need to have that element, but that's not who the natural human being is. And how do we know this? Look at children. Tell me, children, newborn children, young children, what are they looking for most? Conquest? Battle? War? Yes, they play the games and they learn from adults and so on. But a child most importantly thrives on nurturing. Think of a flower. A flower thrives when you water it, when you nurture it. That's where life plays itself out. Men and women, young boys and young girls, both need nurturing. Then they can go out and spread their wings, each one in their own way. What we're lacking in this world is primarily feminine energy. And it's sad to see that many women who have it feel that they have to fight on the terms of men. And they may succeed and sometimes compete and are actually superior. No question in my mind, whether it's intellectually or emotionally or in other ways. But what we're losing is the most important element of all. So I would submit the following. Once we lose sight of our deeper mission, then our gender roles become also confused. Then the men are asked, what is your value? So men think, I have to prove myself. And those that feel that they can't, they're lacking confidence. They don't feel that macho element, feel inferior. How many men out there are acting, are simply vulnerable, little, weak young boys, just masquerading as tough people because they feel that's the only way they'll gain respect. And the other way around as well, with women as well. So what's really lacking is a soulfulness. That soulfulness, I suggest, is the key to truly creating, and not just an equality, but a type of synergy and a harmony between the two genders, between the two energies. So what we need to commit to is not just, obviously anything we can do legislative-wise or other ways is to create equality is one thing. But we need to do something deeper. That is not going to solve the problem. Men are still going to see women often as sex objects. And if they can, will take advantage. Yes, you can write laws, and laws have some value, but it does not change people's attitudes. It just controls them, as long as they can be controlled, as long as they feel they can't get. But if they feel they can get away with it, things will change. We need to call it a revolution, a new sexual revolution, a new revolution that will focus on the soulfulness of who we are, the soul of a man, the soul of a woman. What is feminine energy? What is masculine energy? And how do they complement each other? Because when we look at it from that perspective, it's not competitive at all. It actually absolutely complements, interacts, interconnects, cross-pollinates, and creates something far, far greater. And in general, yes, each of them have both energies, but the focus is on looking not what I gain, how much I gain and how much I control. Because in this world, that's ultimately what people respect. How much you own, how much you control, how much power you wield, how much influence, your equity, your net worth. When you focus, however, on love, the power of love instead of the love of power, if you focus on the soul, you focus on the true values we all really believe in, everything changes. Then a man has his role to play and a woman has her role to play. They both overlap, as I mentioned several times, but at the same time, they also appreciate what they really can bring to the table. So we live in a world where sometimes it's a hostile world, and we need to fight the elements, and we need to protect ourselves. But that never define yourself, however, by that battle, that warrior that you may be. Define yourself by your soul. And for the feminine energy, the need has never been so desperate for the nurturing, for the gentleness, for that extra intuition and sensitivity that a woman can bring to the table in every person's life, in business, at work, and definitely at home. And when both appreciate each other in that sense, and both recognize then how each carries the other, in other words, each one, the feminine carries the masculine dimension, and the masculine carries the feminine dimension, we indeed can create a world where male and female are actually two forces, two forms of energy that transform this world, and see this world as being turning this world into a garden, into a beautiful garden, not just one in which we eliminate adversity, but one in which we bring peace is more than just the absence of war. It's actually bringing a whole deeper dimension of harmony in our lives. I see it, whenever I see these two forces come together in a healthy way, that's when you know magic happens. And each of us can do this. We can do it. It's time to reclaim who we are. The feminine within us, the masculine within us, whoever you may be, it's time to reclaim it. We should not be victims or products of the media, of culture, even of our parents, and of attitudes that have so long dominated, and really come to understand that this world is here really is to bring out the beauty in each one of us. And any type of more aggressive behavior is only there to protect. It's like when you build a garden, you need to have two things. You need to plant, nurture, water the garden, but you also need to weed it. But weeding is only a means to an end. So may we be joint gardeners and see our lives, men and women, each one of us, see ourselves as partners in building this beautiful garden. Both need to do the weeding, both need to do the nurturing. But when you focus and understand the value of each and see where your strengths lie most, that's where we really achieve the ultimate purpose of our lives. So I hope this did some justice to this important and vital topic, especially during this time of the pandemic. I think it's an excellent time to focus on this. We have less distractions of that outer world that I mentioned before, which is very often a masculine world. And we can focus a lot more on our inner world, our inner lives. And when we do so, it will just create better relationships, better homes, better families, and a better future. Because at the end of the day, as Frederick Douglass said, it's far easier to bring up a healthy child than to fix a broken adult. This has been Simon Jacobson, Meaningful Life. Please share, comment, feedback, questions, challenges. Everything is welcome, all in the good spirit of interconnection. And I hope to see you again very shortly. Thank you so much.